Hello and welcome friends. In today's episode, we shall be discussing the topic of writing and reporting for target groups and special interest audience. But before we go any further, let's find out just who constitute the target group or the niche audience. We all know that the world today is multidimensional. There is so much going on related to different issues like environment, development, public policy, sports and others, with news playing catch-up. News keeping pace with the world has expanded beyond the space of politics, health, business and other mainstream topics. The group of people who are interested in knowing in depth about topics like environment, development, women's issues in sports, called special target group or niche audiences, are not just content with the regular dose of politics and entertainment dished out in mainstream media, but want to go beyond. So, if you cater to this select group, you may find yourself tracking stories related to green living, alternate health, women's and children's issues, climate change, rural and sustainable development, and you would be called a reporter with a niche beat. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? So here we are helping you along in your objective to be able to report on niche or special topics like environment, women's issues, development, and others. Holding your hands is our subject expert Shikha Gandhi and I am Sakshi Mandwal. Because of the wide range and scope of niche reporting, we shall be dividing the topic into a number of focused programs. While today's program will be all about reporting and writing on environment, those to follow will focus on reporting on development and women's issues. Not only will Shikha and me be giving you pointers on the skills required by a newcomer for evolving into an environmental journalist, we shall be providing an overview of what you need to know and tools that you must master in order to track and cover a story on environment like risk assessment. And last but not the least, we have pointers for interviewing subject experts, including scientists, and a mini tutorial on how to write different types of environment stories like breaking news, follow-up stories, and features. At the completion of this program, you will be able to develop newsworthy story ideas about environment, be able to find and use sources, research through investigation, studies, and interviewing the appropriate subject experts, write an environment story in a concise, in-depth and lucid manner. Now we start with environmental journalism. Webster's defines the environment as the circumstances, objects or conditions by which one is surrounded. Considered broadly then, every news story is an environmental story in some respect, either directly or indirectly. So, if your story focuses on the world, the people in it, the way we live or the way we impact the world around us, then you are already writing about the environment. But to be specific, here is a list of topics you can cover as an environmental journalist. Air pollution, indoor and outdoor, biodiversity, global warming and climate change, dioxins, endocrine disruptors or hormonally active chemical agents which interfere with the functioning of the endocrine system, hazardous waste, genetically modified crops, groundwater pollution, pesticides, pollution prevention, surface water quality, etc. Perhaps the best thing about this beat is that you always will have plenty to add to the day's story budget. First, let's take a moment to consider what exactly qualifies as an environmental story and what makes an environmental story different from other types of reportage. Imagine the following scenario. There is a proposal for metro rail connecting multiple regions in Haryana. Is this an environmental story? Yes, because as a reporter you can look at the environmental impact of the proposed metro project and can investigate and track the rise in pollution levels due to it. It helps to remember that environmental issues impact several beats, from politics and government to business and economy, health and education. This and the fact that environment molds human lives, health and livelihood intimately makes environmental reporting one of the most powerful beats. However, most beginners are scared of approaching environmental journalism. They say the technology or the science spoofs them off. But this fear is misplaced because when reporting an environmental story, remember that many times your job will be to explain the work of environmental researchers to the people, and the public knows just as much or less than what you know now. According to The Role of the Media in the Electronic Era by John D. Miller, a book researching scientific understanding of Americans published in 2010, only 40% of American adults accepted the concept of biological evolution and did not know answers to simple questions like whether humans lived at the same time as dinosaurs and whether the center of the earth is very hot. There is also a greater need than ever before for journalists who are skilled in reporting both the underlying complexity of science and technology as well as its legal, ethical and political ramifications. Many important topics from environment are left unreported in favor of soft news you can use, like consumer health and medical features on everything from fad diets to the latest exercise machines. We hope that you will help fill the gap, and if you work your way up to become an environment journalist, you can hope to win fame, plus you can be a change agent and impact lives. Investigative environmental stories win prizes and get attention. Sometimes they even lead to changes in laws and lives, like the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel series won the journal much acclaim. The US government had been slow to protect consumers from the dangers of the hazardous chemical bisphenol A. Government regulators sided with the chemical industry in declaring BPA safe for a long time, despite independent studies that repeatedly documented danger to children and adults. The government's about turn in 2010 came only after years of investigation by the Journal Sentinel. Now we move on to the other vital question. What are the things that you need to know in order to be an environmental reporter? To answer that, you need good, solid reporting. Being skeptical, seeking diverse voices and experiences among sources, researching the topic and determining potential consequences and impact. For this, you may need knowledge of and about a number of issues specific to the environmental beat, and this is what we are going to be looking at in some detail next. Environmental reporting does not require a degree in science, but it does require a significant interest in learning, a determination to ask questions until you understand a complicated topic, and the ability to evaluate source credibility while sorting through facts mixed with opinions. Along the way, a healthy respect for the work of scientists helps. What if you want to write about toxicity of a chemical and don't know the jargon and concepts that the researchers use? Here are some concepts and terminology that you must understand for performing your job as a reporter on the beat. Simply put, it is the process of estimating the type and magnitude of risk to human health posed by exposure to chemical substances. Ideally, risk assessments are estimates of the human health risk faced by a population exposed to a particular substance, like, say, DDT. These are the 4 steps of risk assessment. A. Identify the problem. B. Assess exposure. C. Assess toxicity. D. Characterize risk. The first step for determining if something is harmful to humans is identifying and confirming if there is a problem to begin with. When doing this, environmental researchers use different types of studies. Knowing the difference can help you decide if you have a story now or if findings are preliminary but might be important to follow up on. Knowing the difference can also ensure that you state risk responsibly in your stories and avoid sensationalism. For example, you read of a study which talks about the toxicity of cosmetics. Before writing about the issue, you would certainly want to dig deeper to discover whether the findings of the study are preliminary and which were the cosmetics in the study tested on, humans or animals. The answers to these questions make all the difference to the kind of story you will write. For a study with just preliminary findings, you can't say with any certainty that cosmetics are dangerous. And if you do, you will only be spreading panic. Now, let's take a look at the different types of studies that researchers use to determine risk. If a substance causes health problems in animals, it is assumed that it may be harmful to humans. Animal studies are the most common type of study undertaken for problem identification, but not necessarily the most transferable to humans. These are experiments on isolated cells or microorganisms, and scientists use them to explore how chemicals may exert toxic effects. The effects' relevance to people, though, is harder to determine. In this type of problem identification study, the properties of a chemical are compared with substances known to be harmful. What you need to know as a reporter is that in vitro and comparison studies are less conclusive than animal studies, but they can supplement them. If available, these provide the most reliable evidence. Why? Because these are studies of actual people exposed to the hazard. Coming back to our example, you can safely write a conclusive story if epidemiological study data supports the toxicity of cosmetics. If you write a story based on just animal studies data, your story might not have much leg to stand on. So, you have a scenario where scientists have established that there is a problem with a certain chemical being used in, let's say, a popular brand of deodorant based on animal studies. How will you communicate this risk to your audience? The most common way of describing risk is through health risk assessments. These are projections about the dangers of a product involving two scientific measurements: likelihood or the chances a risk will happen, and severity or the magnitude of the health effects if the risk is actually realized. Moreover, because risk assessments are projections, your best guesses will involve ranges of likelihood and severity. For example, we can just say that the risk of a chemical A in a popular brand of deodorant to cause cancer ranges from low to medium. Its severity ranges from medium to high, and so we cannot say the chemical A will cause cancer. The thing to remember about risk assessment is that the most troubling risks are both high likelihood and high severity, and that different sources are likely to emphasize certain aspects of a risk assessment depending on their biases. As a reporter, this means a source may only be telling you part of the story. To understand the full story, you must talk to several sources or review more scientific reports. In this section, we will explore the basics of environment reportage and provide you with resources to help you strengthen both your reporting and final story. Do your homework to find the right source among scientists. Remember, scientists specialize in many areas. You have to find the right specialist for your story. Interviewing a meteorologist instead of a climatologist when researching climate change may yield misleading information. So, start Googling your topic and look for experts who have published reports about the subject or who have some local insights into your story. But do not depend on Google. Remember that story on harmful chemicals in deodorants? You must talk to toxicologists in hospitals along with the researchers working on the subject. You can also interview a few local university and government toxicologists and MDs in your city that may have treated patients with cancers. Make a wish list of sources that you can narrow down as you do more work. It is an advice your mother or grandmother might have given you. When you hear a piece of information, consider the source. So, whether you are talking to a pesticide lobbyist or Greenpeace member, it is important to think about what motivates your source's interpretation of the facts. It's always best to check the authenticity of sources. When using sources who work for foundations or institutes, take time to research them in advance. Non-profit foundations can be funded by politically or ideologically influenced groups, so be aware. Just because a group or an expert has an outspoken opinion about an environmental topic does not mean that you have to include that opinion in your story. First, you must determine if it is accurate, relevant, and free of undue influence. When it comes to environment, every source may have a different take on your story. But you should be able to decide which sources' inputs matter the most. And how can you make your story clear to your reader by not confusing your topic with too many he said, she said quotes? Gather as much information from prior news reports as well as government documents and guidelines. Read reports on the latest research from peer-reviewed scientific journals or at the very least from reputable popular science publications. This is particularly true for journalists here in the developing world, where environmental issues generally go underreported despite the fact that the poorest countries are most vulnerable to environmental calamities like climate change. Information officers at colleges and universities, government agencies and foundations and institutes can help streamline your reporting process. Whenever you can, contact an expert via an information officer. Good information officers can help steer you to the most articulate sources and sometimes even help answer basic questions. Take advantage of them and their expertise. We are sure that you must be feeling bogged down with so much complicated stuff. To make it simple, you can follow these general guidelines to help cover your bases and make your stories accurate, relevant, and fair. An environment story may have a number of ramifications. So, look into all different angles before even charting your coverage plan. Too often, journalists only report what they hear from government officials speaking at conferences. Avoid this at all costs. Scientists are also excellent sources. They generally share your pursuit of the truth, but try to explain what they are saying in everyday terms. Remember to include the voices of others in your story too, like villagers, non-governmental organizations, or top business people. If journalists don't also report on ways to mitigate and adapt to an environment problem like climate change, the public is likely to lose interest. Suggest solutions. This is especially useful when reporting on solutions or habitats, plants or animals threatened by climate change. Give the issue a face and a voice. And last but not the least, link global issues to local ones. What makes talking with environmental and scientific experts different from talking with other types of sources? Plenty. It can be difficult to establish open communication with sources when you feel like you're talking to someone from a different planet. Environmental scientists and experts have spent years, decades even, learning their own language so that they can communicate with peers and write for niche professional journals. For some of them, the very notion of talking with someone outside their realm of knowledge is as foreign as asking them to step into a journalism job for a day. So the best way to get information in the most efficient way while interviewing scientists is by being prepared. You have to be on the same page as them. If officials and scientists mistrust you, be persistent. Try approaching them directly at conferences and seminars and ask them more probing questions that they often won't discuss in public speeches. For highly technical content, you could let a scientist review your draft. This should help you gain trust of your interviewee. The thing to do is to know the subject of your story thoroughly, plan out questions you want to ask, and listen and adapt while you interview. Attending a global summit like a biodiversity conference can seem overwhelming with so many people to meet and events to attend. So getting to know some sources in your country's delegation or finding other local participants may be useful, as they could help you find and access information. Rather than trying to cover anything, pick a few topics to follow them. Also, check what your fellow journalists are hearing from their own country delegations. You may end up knowing more about the pace of negotiations than your own delegates. Before moving to the next topic in today's program, let's take a few minutes to recap and summarize. Summing up what we have learned. Environmental journalists understand and communicate the science related to environment, and they understand concepts like risk assessment, different types of studies for risk assessment, and understand biases of the source before reporting. Now comes the fun part. You have determined your story angle and found the best sources, done your own research so you can ask the best questions to get to the heart of your story. You have talked to experts and community members about the topic, and now you have a notebook full of quotes and a long list of jargon. Now we will review some basic ways to structure your environmental stories, as well as special tips on how to communicate the science and technology in ways your audience can understand. But before we get started, we want to share the secret of good environmental writing. It is to write for your audience and make him understand and respond to your story. The two important environment story formats are breaking news with an environmental angle and providing environmental context for ongoing stories and issues. These are breaking news stories with an environmental angle. An example could be the passing of the controversial new bill on genetically modified foods. If the controversial bill is passed by Parliament, it will automatically be the main story and a breaking news story. Other examples of breaking news stories could be an oil spill on the highway, or an approaching hurricane, or a new research discovery impacting life on Earth. Before breaking an environment story, you must take a look at the significance, context, and caveats of your story. The first thing to judge is whether the environmental angle that your news story offers is significant enough. Once you've determined that your breaking news is significant, you need to explore the impact and relevance of an environmental angle. For example, you have a scenario where the local government officials are proposing to hike the costs of garbage collection and recycling. First, you have to decide if this topic is important enough to be covered as breaking news. If you decide it is, then you may have to focus on the issue that impacts the audience most. That is the price hike. Your story needs to include the immediate impact on your audience first. How much will they have to pay more for new services? In this case, the environmental part of the story may not be your lead, but that doesn't mean it won't be an integral part of creating a memorable story. As with all news stories, the significance of the event should be clear at the beginning. This means that you must not make the audience wait too long to know, why does the story matter to me? Environmental stories that delve into context fall into the second category. These can also be called features. They may take a bit more time but offer rich rewards, both professionally and personally. These stories fall into a few basic types that work particularly well for the beat. These follow up on recent trends. They take a finding or a series of pieces of evidence about a particular environmental topic and translate them for public consumption. Examples can be related to waste cycling, water usage, industrial waste, product contamination, and air pollution. Explanatory stories do just that. They take a complicated environmental topic, whether it is lead poisoning or the impact of flooding in a particular region, and break it down to its basic core. Pulling off an explanatory story takes having strong expert contacts and plenty of time to relate the science to the personal. Follow the People stories make environmental topics real by introducing readers to researchers, experts, scientists, and others whose lives are deeply intertwined with environmental subjects. These can include day-in-the-life stories of researchers on a quest to find ways to conserve water and improve water quality, or small business owners focused on buying and selling local produce. A strong personality drives these stories forward. Your audience will care more about the quality of the water coming out of the faucets, for example, when they realize the work of one person to make it better. In today's program, we have learned to understand the challenges and complexities of reporting on environmental issues. We have learned to communicate the science behind the issues that affect us and be able to write different types of environmental stories. We have also provided tools for interviewing subject experts and covering conferences. That is all for today. Thank you and goodbye.